Welcome to Now Serving a Side of Therapy, your intro guide into the therapeutic world. Together, we'll explore various aspects around how to show up for ourselves and others by tending to our own mental and emotional well-being. I'm your host, Dalton Huckabee, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you've joined me. Welcome to this week's episode of Now Serving a Side of Therapy, a client's intro guide into the therapeutic world. Today, Vita Bourne is joining us. She is an associate marriage and family therapist, has a BA in philosophy, master's in psychology. All of that benefits her work with her clients by exploring faith and meaning making within the therapeutic setting while supporting those with trauma, depression, and grief and loss. From her own personal experiences, she knew at 14 years of age that she wanted to support others in navigating through trauma and learning how that affects us directly. So before we continue, I have to pause there. And I was really curious. At 14 years old, you knew you wanted to go into this line of work. So that obviously piqued my interest. And I was just curious if there's anything that you wanted to share around that within the context of this setting, just to kind of give a little insight as to what made you decide that at 14 years of age.
Thanks for asking, Dalton. To be quite honest with you, there was the natural pull already to trying to understand people's behaviors and what motivated them. Coming from my own family background, there's a lot of dysfunction, a lot of intergenerational family trauma. So before I even had those terms to put on the behaviors and the things that I was witnessing, there was already a lot of dysfunction that I was aware of from a young, early age that was directly impacting me and felt like it was limiting the ways in which I could show up in the world and was limiting the ways in which my family could show up for me. And so actually around 14, I accidentally stumbled upon a book and just flipping through it, fell on a page, and that was like, oh my gosh, this just helped me understand through a case study that I just ended up reading so much about one of my family members. And it just kind of opened me up to, wow, I could actually study this field and then understand what actually happened to this person. What are the motivators? What were the issues that really propelled them to become who they are now? And maybe what are the options for them to change within that scope as well?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack, right? The impact, a lot to unpack the impact. And so, like, when I think of 14 years of age, I don't think of someone kind of having these experiences and thinking, oh man, let me think about what might have gone on for the other person, right? Or like you almost kind of like, right, at 14 years of age, like, what did I do wrong? Like, oftentimes there might be like these internalizing tendencies. Oh, I did something wrong, or they're upset at me, right? It's like stuff like this. And so, but the fact that you were able to actually have that bandwidth to be able to kind of like see outside of that into this other realm of, oh, what's going on for the other person, right? And just trying to understand things in a different way. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
And part of that comes from, I understand that part of that comes from maybe a deeper core self that is empathic, which I believe in through IFS, but then also through trauma that forces children to maybe become parentified from a younger age and then take on the understanding responsibility of knowing and being attuned to their caregivers from a younger age than maybe they should be naturally.
I wish that my family had also gotten into therapy, when I was younger. I could see the benefits of that, right? So in a sense, it's I also have a history of like health and fitness, right? So I got into that for the same reason. Oh, I could see how health and fitness would benefit, me and my family when you were younger. And same thing with, therapy too. And so, because oftentimes, right, it's these earlier life experiences that can contribute to who we are today, and how we function within relationships. And so, up until now, we've just been kind of building on, the prior episodes for this podcast. We've just been kind of building on, well, what is the intake process like, and how do you build like rapport and trust, and within the client therapist relationship. So today is really this episode is really kind of the first one that we're getting into, where we start to dive into the parts of what makes us and unique, like what makes us tick. And so this allows us the opportunity to be able to identify, like you said, right, what drives our motivations and our behaviors and our decisions as we navigate through interpersonal relationships.
Such a multi-layered question. Who are we? What makes us tick? Oh my goodness. So many ways of
Right.
explaining it. Like with younger clients, sometimes we'll like do art therapy of like maybe drawing a figurine and trying to use word associations. There is different other systems that I use with older folks, like the Enneagram, which is also like a personality perspective of trying to understand who we are, what makes us tick, motivations, how we connect with other types. But we're not going to get into that today.
I'm going to actually take that, and then we can get into it on the episode after I take it, because I haven't taken it myself. So you've piqued my curiosity around that. To define attachment style, which is a buzzword, right? Attachment styles is such a buzzword. You might even find it on TikTok videos out there, right? I'm not on TikTok, but that's what I've heard. They're on there.
Yeah, social media is buzzing with attachment styles. Like, what kind of style are you? Accusing other people of their style.
Yes, that's come up in conversations and sessions, right? Accusing other people of their own styles. But when we think about attachment styles, it's the patterns of emotional bonding, right, that individuals develop in close relationships, particularly with primary caregivers in their earlier childhood years, but then also later on as we develop to adulthood and our romantic partner relationships. And so we can think about like the ideal, right? The ideal form of attachment style is a secure one.
Absolutely, Dalton. Yeah, having a secure attachment. I have yet to meet that many people with secure attachment styles, I'll be honest. It is unfortunately quite a rarity, because what secure attachment looks like is having comfort with expressing emotions, being vulnerable, relying on others to a healthy degree, while also retaining a strong sense of independence. That's not being threatened basically by your attachment of the other person.
In order to be able to kind of get there, right, we have to be aware of our own stuff, if you will, right? So being able to have the capacity to acknowledge when we are outside of that, right, to then be, which we'll get into, right, some other attachment styles, but being able to have that kind of mindfulness or that awareness around, oh yeah, I can see that maybe I'm not feeling too secure, something else is coming up for me, right, and being able to have that kind of honest evaluation of ourselves, and then kind of being in this place of curiosity. We talked last episode about being in this place of curiosity about, okay, well, what's going on for me, what's coming up for me, and then how can we move towards this place of secure attachment.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that like healthy, trusting conversations in times of conflict and tension is very much what we want to see in secure attachments, and what we do see, because that helps us embody curiosity, more calm, more focused on maintaining connection rather than proving the other person right or wrong, or one of them being the victim, one of them being the perpetrator, like really stepping out of those roles.
Yeah, or the blaming or shaming tendencies, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talking about this secure attachment style, and ideally this place of being able to, like you said, being able to express our emotions and being vulnerable, right? And while having a strong sense of independence, while also having a healthy sense of dependence, right? So in these other attachment styles we'll get into, we'll see how independence and dependence can really tug in these more extreme ways. But with secure attachment, it's like we have a strong sense of, okay, I know who I am, while I can like be in relationship with you in a kind of more healthy, dependent way.
I guess I perceive it for myself is a strong core sense of self that does not overlap too much with other people's selves. Whether that means the other person's self is overlapping with yours or impeding on yours, nor is your self impeding on their sense of self. If that makes sense.
Mhm. Yes, yeah. And in fact, then that kind of makes me think of um, values when it comes to boundaries, right? For if there is too much crossover, right? How do we how do we respond to that? And one of those ways could be like in this anxious attachment style.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you talk a little bit about like anxious attachment style?
Oh, definitely. Typically, people with anxious attachment styles have had inconsistent and unreliable caregiving experiences. So, because of that, there is a core belief that you can't rely on other people to be there for you. And that really becomes embodied in a fear of abandonment that I am stuck in a sense of an anxiety and insecurity that I will be abandoned at some point, that I will be left alone to my own devices, and I'm going to be unwanted and unneeded. And what that then results in is behaviors that are, I hate using this word, but this is the colloquially used word, clingy, needy. And those are such judgmental words that are often pinned on anxiously attached people. And I believe that that really helps propel the shame spiral, honestly. It doesn't help relieve it. And so while this person's really craving closeness, that does get embodied in these behaviors that are clingy and needy.
Yeah, and even it happens both in children and adults, right? Like behavior is there for a reason, right? So it's expressing something. So like you said, the behavior could be misunderstood or like you said, or even judged. People in fear of abandonment is another kind of buzzword that can float around too, right? So we're saying that, okay, well, maybe if we have this fear of abandonment, whether people have kind of ideally linked that potentially to this anxious attachment style, right? That's that can be a for their listeners to kind of tune into that for themselves. But that can be a place to go to try to understand what's coming up, because if the behavior is exhibiting in a certain way and we're like, I don't even know why, it's just the way it is, right? It's, again, these behaviors are so automatic, right, and they're pattern. And so just trying to offer some kind of deeper understanding of where it might be coming from or where it might be originating from. You work with clients long enough, right? You're bound to get into childhood at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. In fact, I, lightly and gently try and course us towards exploring that childhood piece. Um, Whether, in the first couple of sessions, I don't really push it, but just eventually kind of noticing as we're talking about different relationships that are showing up in their current life, whether that's parental figures, friends, or romantic partners or romantic interests. Let's observe the theme of what are the points of tension or stress as you're talking about those relationships. Let's observe if those focus more on fear of abandonment with the kind of flavor of what if they leave me, or fear of abandonment in terms of what if they get too close and threaten my sense of independence, which is more of the avoidant type.
Yeah, and I like what you said about identifying theme, right? A lot of kind of the work that we do is like with clients is like trying to identify these themes that might be, kind of underlying current, right? That's kind of pervasive across all areas of their life. Because like you said, it doesn't matter the kind of relationship we're talking about. If it's popping up in one area of their life, it's likely going to be popping up in other areas of their lives as well, whether it's at work or at school or yeah, friends or family, whatnot.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's the way I approach therapy is through IFS, internal family systems therapy. So a lot of that is really becoming aware of what parts are part of our internal system, as in what kind of behaviors, what kind of beliefs do we hold, and how do they show up? And usually those beliefs and patterns of behavior result from early childhood experiences that maybe were difficult or even traumatic, and parts of us that are like, we're not ever going to want to experience that ever again. We're going to do whatever we can to stop that from happening. And so even with attachment, I'm very much looking at attachment through IFS as well, of like, let's see what kind of behaviors are really showing up and what are they trying to protect us from right here, right now.
Yeah, exactly. And so, future episodes, right, we'll get into like kind of like more modality specifics, topics of discussion. And so definitely kind of maybe plant a little seed for maybe returning for IFS discussion in the future. When we start to observe these parts of ourselves coming up, right, and for example, being clingy, right, being too clingy. If someone's judged me my whole life for being too clingy, I'm likely to then take that on. So that's part of the kind of rupture within ourselves, right? That can happen when just by being surrounded by other people. So when we talk about like attachment styles, we can almost kind of think of it as like ruptures that have happened in important relationships in our lives, right? And so if we haven't received kind of like that adequate care or understanding throughout these kind of challenging experiences that we've had, then however people have responded to us, that's how we're going to take that on later on. And unless, part of adulting, right, is kind of like unlearning what we've learned, right, and trying to be with ourselves and others in a new and different way. And this is a big part of that.
It's really acknowledging that with my clients is that often there's a big gap between, as you're in this work, you're figuring out, or you've already figured out that something about the way you grew up is not serving you anymore. And you don't want to repeat that pattern. But then there's a big gap between, well, then what do I do instead? What is the healthy thing to do instead? And so kind of that is adulting as you're maturing and becoming more self-aware of what patterns then do I want to embody? What beliefs are with me?
Yes. And then how do I get there? Right. Another kind is what's called avoidant attachment style. And that might develop earlier on for people, right, that might be experiencing like emotional neglect, right, or just kind of where caregivers aren't able to provide a certain level of consistency around, or emotional availability for people. And so then what happens with that is that we start to learn, oh, we can't we can't depend on other people, right? Going back to that dependence and independence. I can't depend on them for this. So then therefore I might develop this over sense of independence. Like I can just do it myself. Nobody else is going to be there for me to help me out.
Absolutely. So much hyper independence. And I especially have noticed that in specific groups that I work with, maybe eldest daughters, maybe first generation kids. A lot of that hyper independence might have been because of different ways that the parents might have raised the kids, but also because of a sense of responsibility, not just for taking care of yourself and your feelings, but then also you have younger siblings that now you have to be the older sibling for when you're still a young child. And so, yeah, that kind of bridging the gap between younger siblings, being allied with your parents, a lot of those kids that I work with end up having some avoidant attachment behaviors, whether or not they have avoidant attachment themselves, but that hyper independence that sometimes does show up also with their attachment style of not wanting to rely too much on other people, because again, there's a very strong expectation of, I got this. I can only depend on myself to process these feelings. That's it.
Or even that sense of, oh, I might get hurt if I do try to depend on them because it's been my experience that they've not been there, right? So there can be this tendency to avoid intimacy and emotional disclosures, right? But to your point around kind of, you were referring to parentified, right? Being parentified earlier, and that was me, right? I was the oldest of 6 kids growing up, so so I definitely have, I've worked through some avoidant attachment style my stuff myself.
It's interesting the overlap because it's not like fully a one and the same, but there is some overlap between the two that we're noticing. I'm curious what your thoughts are about it, because I feel like in my experience, it tends to have, it's like a Venn diagram of like there's avoidant attachment and then there's parentified kids. And with both, we're seeing similar behaviors or even similar experiences where it's like sometimes a little bit difficult for me to identify how much of this is the attachment style and attachment wounds and how much of this is more expectations put on us from a young age to be more mature and more adult than we're ready to be.
Pick this aspect of parentified that we were talking about, right? Like you could have, and again, there's these twin studies, right? People call it twin studies, right? You have twins who are exposed, say, for example, to the same natural disaster, but they respond in different ways, right? One might be like have a traumatic experience around it. The other one feels like, hey, I'm good, right? And so similarly, you can take someone who has this parentified experience, but inherently we all have these kind of genetic traits that we're born with, right? So then when we're exposed to the environment, they get expressed. So if you've heard of the term genetic expression, that's a little bit, right? A little flavor of what that's like. And so even though like you might have been parentified and I might have been parentified based on our own unique genetic traits, we might respond to those challenging situations in our own unique and different ways.
Absolutely. I guess the way, yeah, as you're talking about genetic predisposition, I think of it kind of as an electric outlet, or not outlet. What is that? Panels where there's like a whole switchboard of different kind of like switches, right? Which like we have a predisposition to for them to maybe switch or not, to switching on or just staying off. And those experiences, whether it's positive protective factors or negative experiences, which are traumatic, that can switch it on or keep it off.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. That's awesome. I'm going to use that with clients.
Yes, let's do it. Because yeah, as you're pointing out with like different siblings within the same family, right? Like one exposed to positive experiences which don't switch on that genetic predisposition that might be negative, or might have more negative experiences, which keeps the switch off or keeps it on now, and it's really hard to turn it off. Can you go through the fear? Can you delve into the fear of being dependent on someone else to take care of you and know your hurts, your needs, your feelings?
No, that's that over sense of hyper independence, though, right? That kind of keeps coming through. I can do it myself.
Yeah, who needs emotional closeness when I'm like emotionally aware of myself? Like I don't need to talk about it with anyone else. I have it all figured out. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So that leads us to disorganized attachment style, right? Which is a mix of both, right? It's a bit of mix of both of anxious and avoidant, but kind of tends to stem from individuals who might have had more of a disruptive childhood, such as around trauma or abuse or neglect.
Yeah, there's a lot more volatility in the childhood environment, the way I understand it, with disorganized attachment. A lot more fear and distrust about relying on a caregiver at all. Because again, the volatility there is just, you can't ever relax in terms of knowing, is the parent going to be available? Are they not?
Challenged with that trusting factor, right? But also at the same time, still wanting that closeness. So it creates this kind of duality.
Right. And it's a really confusing situation, right? If you're a young child relying on a caregiver who is sometimes available and sometimes isn't. And so this is the only person in your life as you're a very young child who you can rely on, that you're built to rely on this person to make sure they survive. And yet this might also be a figure that is causing a lot of fear and sense of lack of security in your life. So there is that internal tension that is created of, come here, like let's connect, and then also get away from me. I kind of really try to visualize or symbolize it through an outstretched hand and then also a hand that's pushing away at the same time. I feel like that's how
Yeah, come here, go away, huh? Yep, this push and pull. Yeah. And so, I mean, and if that's what's kind of coming up for us, in relationships, I mean, if it's confusing for other people, it's also confusing for us if we're in that space, right? Again, we can only kind of be with people in a way that we are with ourselves, right? So again, if that's how we're kind of presenting in relationships with other people, it's also kind of just symbolic of that internalized struggle for ourselves.
Absolutely. The internal gets definitely externalized. Yeah.
Something that I was just thinking of as we were talking about this, when we think of like countertransference and the client therapist relationship, um, how we as therapists kind of need to be aware if our own attachment style stuff is coming up in the
Mhm.
relationship with our clients.
Absolutely.
Do you have any experience around that?
Let's see. I'll be honest, I've noticed that with certain clients that I've worked with, I really try to be aware of countertransference. And in fact, that's something I always ask my supervisors that I work with. Hey, if there's a blind spot that I'm not noticing, which we all have, please put a light to it. I try to be aware, but of course, there's going to be stuff that I miss. But in terms of attachment and my own attachment experience with clients, I think when there's been people who want a little bit more of me, maybe asking me more personal questions, I try to be aware that I'm a stranger in the room. They don't really know that much about me, and yet they are expected to kind of share and open up to me and trust me. And so while keeping that in mind, I also try to be aware, like, okay, there's some anxiety coming up. Why do they want to know me more? I need to keep a sense of independence in the room as like my own self. But then how do I connect with them? How do I build that closeness without becoming more of a friendly confidant versus somebody who's actually helping them in self-exploration and self-understanding? And so I think in that way, the anxiety has come up of like wanting to protect myself and distance myself a little bit more for the professional boundary to be maintained, but then also again trying to still acknowledge that and be present and connected in an appropriate way. It almost sounds like disorganized attachment in itself, like, right, let's like come here, let's connect, like let me get to know you better, but then also like stay away. It can sound like that, but it's also, well, let's observe the context here. We don't have an intimate relationship. We have a professional therapeutic relationship where we're here focusing on you and me acting here as a person who is helping you explore yourself and understand yourself better. You are the expert in your own life and your own experiences. Maybe I'm here holding up the mirror or shining a light to some of the parts that are harder to see or even harder to acknowledge.
Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to check out our next episode as we continue to explore more elements of your therapeutic journey.